Politics. A quick, this is, I swear, will be the only element of audience participation. Hands up on who has a vague sense of sort of disquiet and unease about the state of it in general at the moment. My work here is done. Thank you. That, I think, when I was thinking about this book and thinking about the state of affairs at the moment, was the sense I had too, and I sense that in a lot of people in this country looking at the political system. And I don't think it's a partisan thing. Although since the last election there are a lot of people, particularly on the right, who say, well, all this disquiet about politics, it's just disgruntlement from progressives at having lost. I don't think that's it at all. I think there are fundamental things that have happened to our politics, changes to the structure and nature of our politics, that have left a lot of people feeling a sense of unease about it, a sense of disconnection, a sense that the politics they thought existed is no longer serving necessarily the sort of function that they imagined it might do. And I think we've long had a sense that politics is this delegation that we make, that there are things that need to be done, things that need to be managed, things that need to be organised, things that need to be envisioned and imagined, that we give charge to these other people that we elect, and we say, on the basis of those ideas that you've given us, on the basis of that plan, on the basis of that sense of commitment you have, we invest in you this really quite solemn responsibility of doing that on our behalf. And that's been the traditional setup of the game. I don't know who's watching the Keating interviews at the moment with Kerry O'Brien. There is a guy, Paul Keating, he talks a lot in those interviews about power, about the political process, about how you get things done in the back rooms of politics. But always with him, there's this other thing, that the purpose of that activity, that the reason he's engaging in those sometimes ruthless plays of factional deal, of the number crunching that is behind the political game, the purpose that he has is because there's a vision, there's a set of things that he wants to do. It's very strong with Keating, and you sense it in these interviews. As much as he is the ruthless guy, he has also the vision ideologically and in policy terms as well, and that's what's driving him. And this is the thing that I think has changed in our politics. And it's a subtle shift that politics back in that time, and it's not so long ago, politics was a thing that was driven by those people. It was driven by the people at the front of the game, but the people who, were the representatives, the actual politicians, driven by a vision with the nous to get themselves into a position to enact it, but in charge of the show. And the thing that has shifted, I think, and this is a string of consequences, is that now we see a strange shift in the power balance within politics, that it's not so much those people in charge, but the people behind them. And it's the domination now in politics of the professional political class, the people who make politics work, that I think is taking it off the rails. There's no stronger figure currently in the federal government than the Chief of Staff and the Office of the Prime Minister. There were no stronger figures in the Gillard government than the factional people behind her that had put her into power. And these people are doing this stuff not for necessarily policy objectives, more often, and this is where politics, I think, has got lost, in a cyclical thing where the most important thing is to preserve your position. The most important thing is to win power. And at some point along this path from, say, Keating to Abbott or to Rudd even, although we might talk more about Rudd, Rudd's a strange hybrid, there has been this dislocation and this forgetting of the primary purpose. And why I think this is, it's obviously problematic on a number of levels, but why, and this is what I explore in this book, The Year My Politics Broke, why this is problematic right now is that possibly at no time, or at very few times in our short sort of history as an organised white nation, we face this set of extraordinary challenges. Extraordinary challenges that we really have no process other than this political process to encounter and grapple with and deal with. Now, the obvious one is something like climate change. Whether you are faintly sceptical about its possibilities, whether you fully embrace the worst descriptions of the science, whether you simply take the view that, well, there's a fair amount of scientific evidence and that would urge some sort of sense of caution or at least, prophylactic action anywhere on that sort of spectrum, you have to wonder whether the political game we have now is the sort of apparatus that can deal with something that big. Why is that? Because the changes that have happened in politics have created this new form of politics, as I say, driven by the backroom, driven by the need for power, driven by the want for that sort of self-sustaining political ecosystem. And that excludes a whole lot of stuff. It excludes stuff that's tough, that's difficult, that might involve losers in the political equation. It makes it very hard now to come out with a piece of policy that's difficult, that's challenging, or that might say, as it would do necessarily with anything that was going to fundamentally alter our economy, that would do something about climate, would involve change and dislocation that might prove unpopular or take a real sales job, take that sort of pitch of ideology and belief and challenge. That's not in the vocabulary of the modern politics. The modern politics wants safety. The modern politics wants the removal of the rough edges. The modern politics wants a series of propositions that can be pitched without losers and can be pitched without risk. And this modern politics, it inhabits this strange middle ground now, because the other refinement that it has made is in the electoral sense, to narrowly grasp who it is that it needs to appeal to become elected, to sustain that self-sustaining political ecosystem. And the people that it needs to talk to in most electoral settings are the undecided people. There's nothing wrong with that, but those people are necessarily of the middle ground. They're people without firm ideological conviction, without firm policy belief, who would come or go often on self-interest perhaps, or a narrow range of ideas that are pitched around the centre. That distorts the political discussion. It changes the nature of our political conversation. It changes the nature of our political parties. The parties become to resemble themselves, each other. They become all but indistinguishable. Although I think we're seeing in recent weeks, yes, there are things that there are differences in tone and attitude that, yes, still there, but in the electoral sense, in the way that they pitch to us in those critical moments every 3 or 4 years, they try to resemble each other. The last election we had was a contest not of ideas or challenging vastly different descriptions for our country and our lives. It was a contest that said, I'm not him. I'm not him. And that was the amount of it. And I think that narrowing of the political discussion, that narrowing of this contest really sells us incredibly short and is not sufficient to deal with the stuff we have to deal with. The parties morph into each other. We had a Conservative coalition in this party running in the last campaign on a program of national disability insurance, of extremely generous parental leave, of education funding increasing on the basis of need. It was fundamentally a sort of a social democrat agenda from the Conservative parties. We saw the Labor Party, the nominal progressive party in this equation, running on incredible harshness to asylum seekers, the sort of traditional territory of the other side. There's this blending between the two parties that removes choice, because choice is no longer the proposition in politics. The proposition in politics is the person, the personality. It's that thing of the self-sustaining thing. It's the people that can be not standing for the awkward baggage of policy and ideas, but standing for the blandness of the centre. And that's what the political game as it's now arranged, would have. And not only does that leave voters shortchanged, but it does something weird then to the structural base of those political parties, those entities. It hollows them out because the body of belief behind the Liberal Party still sits, rather now sits, somewhere to the right of the Liberal Party, because the Liberal Party has drifted to the centre. This likewise with the Labor Party. It leaves its base behind. It drifts to the centre. It assumes the policies of the opponent. It leaves the base behind. So those political parties start to become less meaningful entities in their own right. So I think this is a really weird and dangerous space. And I think it's a space which is either hitting some sort of peak derp, as people would say on the internet, whether it's hitting some sort of peak point of madness and weirdness and dysfunction, or it's something which is transitory and hopefully will change. And I hope that second part is the right answer to that, because, as I say, there are serious things that need to be dealt with, and this trust to politics, that's still in place. We have no alternative but to invest this faith in this organisation and this structure, which we hope will carry out our business. It goes beyond climate. It goes to the Australian economy. The Australian economy is an extraordinary place at the moment where great change has to take place. The things that have sustained us, the great good fortune of the sort of resource-based economy is a thing which is fading, as we all know. That new waves have to be found to sustain, the existence we have. That's not going to be an easy transition, and that will involve difficult policy choices. That will involve difficult policy choices that the new politics wouldn't countenance, like, for example, forgetting about the auto industry. The Productivity Commission about 7 years ago did an examination of the auto industry in which it concluded that you would actually increase Australian GDP if you pulled the money that you were putting into the auto industry out of it, let it collapse. That would have a beneficial effect on the economy. That's a difficult political choice, though, and the political system that we charge with making that choice, given the option of making the choice on the facts or making the choice on the political imperatives in play, will choose most often to do that on the basis of the political imperatives. There's another player in all of this, of course, and that's the relationship that media has with politics. And that's a rich one and an important one, but the causal relationship, did media bring politics to this point, or has politics brought media to the point they're at now? I actually think that media is in such a weakened state for all number of reasons at one level in the mainstream that politics can now effectively game media. The politics has worked out how to use the nature of modern media to its own ends. Politics has worked out that modern media are actually quite like at the moment, for a range of reasons, most of them about its current sort of commercial vulnerability. Modern politics knows that media wants stories about celebrity, wants stories about sensation, wants stories that move quickly without a great sort of thundering base in evidence and policy and all that sort of stuff. So it serves the interests of both politics and media to focus on that stuff that we now see, the sort of endless ticking over of the very quick cycle. We've moved beyond the 24-hour news cycle. We're now in the 2-hour news cycle, the 10-minute news cycle, the thing that will be tweeted by 2:30 this afternoon that will change everything until 4 o'clock. That's the current nature of this sort of political discussion at one level. The hope, though, is that in all these things there are other levels. The hope is that yes, in terms of information, there is this other level of discourse now outside of the mainstream, which is incredibly rich and which is easy to tap into and is a very empowering thing. I think at no point, this is the weird disconnection, at no point in our recent history has politics been less interested in policy, and at no point has the capacity been there for people to be more interested and more engaged and more informed in those policy ideas. So we have this sort of strange disconnection between the two worlds. And I think we see great possibilities in that. And one of the possibilities is the effectiveness of sort of community action, of people actually grouping together and using the modern possibilities of connection and community to change small things in their political realm. We saw that in the seat of Indi in the last election. There's an example of a seat which, yes, the incumbent had whittled away a pretty substantial margin over successive polls, but it was still held by a margin that, by the conventions of Australian politics, is safe. It's held by a similar margin that the seat of Kooyong is, for example, held by. So if what was done in Indi, which was an incredibly detailed micro program of community connection, it was a campaign that was about the community before it was about the candidate. The campaign threw up the candidate, the campaign brought the people together, the campaign exchanged the ideas through that community. And that's the sort of thing which is becoming increasingly possible. And that's the sort of thing that I think ultimately is going to change this political system, that will challenge the self-contained ecosystem of modern politics, that will say to that system, well, actually, you're not serving our interests. Our interests lie in you taking difficult decisions. Our interests lie in you convincing us of the worth of policy that may not be to our advantage, and we are mature enough to have that discussion. Politics doesn't credit us with that sort of maturity or intelligence. I think we credit ourselves with that sort of maturity of intelligence, and I think ultimately that will mean that we will form ways of connecting and of changing subtly and slowly that political system. I mean, we send people to represent us in a place, in a central location, because kind of that's the way it used to be convenient when they travelled by steam train and horse and cart. We're in a very different world. There's a thing on radio on Sunday night on the ABC, and was this guy who's an inventor and he's working in disability area. And the thing that he's working on is incredibly sensitive neuroswitching. And what this does is it takes the electrical impulse that, I don't understand this science, so this isn't, if anybody knows what this actually is about, they'll think that I'm an idiot, but I'll explain it as best I can. It takes the electrical impulses that might lead to muscle movement and allows them to then operate machinery, whether that be a prosthetic, whether that be an eye, whether that be computing. And what that's going to lead to within a very short space of maybe 2 or 5 or 10 years is the integration of the capacity for digital networking into just your physical self. Computing is going to stop being a thing you think about. It's just going to be a thing that happens. It's going to be a part of your world and life, and all the connections that makes possible will be just a part of your world and life, because that little neuroswitching or whatever else that's developed will allow you, at thinking about moving that forearm, will tweak that connection, which then moves that cursor around the data and sends that message in an entirely unmeditated and organic way. Why do I mention that? Because that's the world that is emerging, that is the world that's becoming, and that's not the world that packed steam trains with politicians from Melbourne and Sydney and sent them to live in Canberra. It's not the world that delegated that political responsibility because of those issues of distance and connection. These are the things that made that entire political structure necessary, is that we couldn't have everybody together at the one place and the one time to sort of talk in an easy and convenient way. And in the future, very soon now, almost now, we will. And initially we're going to use that, I suspect, to change the way the existing politics works. Subsequent to that, I think we're going to use it to change that apparatus altogether. So this might have been the moment my politics broke, but in thinking about that and in talking about it subsequent to this book, I can see the way it's going to heal. I can see the way that's going to change. And it's going to be because politics is fundamentally of a servant of the thing we need done, the things we need done. And I think that we will find the ways to ensure that that happens. So it's a positive message.